Welcome back to the Eduverse Enigma podcast. This week, we're chatting with special guest Michael Avis, founder and president of Tapvigo Solutions. This episode, we'll be diving into VR and XR in the educational training space, equity, diversity, and inclusion in the classroom, and new technologies impacting the education space. You won't want to miss it.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Eduverse podcast. Today, I have Michael Avis on, and really excited to have you on with your past experience in the education space in virtual reality and your current experience in the space, Michael. So could you give the audience a little introduction about yourself?
Sure, Evan. Thanks for having me. My name is Michael Avis. I've been working in education for, 24 years, up until about 3 months ago, where I finally left higher ed, and now I'm running my own company called Tapvigo Solutions. And what my company does is it works with educational institutions and other groups to look at ways that they can innovate their communication, and that involves a lot of, obviously, XR and immersive tech.
Amazing. And could you give a little bit of background on what you were doing in higher education before you started Tapvigo?
Sure. So I worked at George Brown for about 10 years, and the last 4 years I was working in their Center for Teaching and Learning, where I really focused on innovative ways to teach, innovative ways to help students learn, and innovative ways for faculty to really start to look at new technologies and ways that they can harness those in their teaching and learning. And then sort of in that time, I've been working on a consulting basis a little bit with some other schools, just to sort of talk to them about where they're going and to help them look at a future vision for education.
Amazing. And I guess to take a couple steps back, I'm curious, what was the reason that you wanted to go into education and are still in the education space and trying to push it forward? Was it an experience that you had as a kid, or having your own kids, or what?
Well, both my parents were professors, so
Okay.
I was always, in academia in some ways. I just kind of fell into it. I graduated university, and then I started my first job as an educational assistant in grade 1 in Guelph, where I just sort of was in a classroom. I just graduated from university, and I was in a classroom. One of my friend's parents was actually a teacher at the school, the principal. She said, "Can you come in?" And spending the time in the grade 1 class just made me think, yeah, this is where I want to be. So I spent lots of time kind of drifting in and out. I lived in South America for 10 years and I taught there. And that's really where I started my ed tech journey, where I really started to see the innovation there. I did my master's at Kingston University in London, England. And I got my first chance to try the old smart boards, the old smart boards with the trays and the four different pens.
Yeah.
And I started to do that, and I just said, wow, this is such a good way to use technology to engage students. And then from there, when I moved back to Canada, I went to the University of Toronto, OISE, so the Ontario Institute for Studies. Then I worked in the TDSB for a bit, and I worked in a private school as well. So really, I've taught from grade 1, educational assistant, all the way to university, Con Ed at university, and then college. So it's been a long journey. I do think that even though I'm not currently employed in an educational institution, I'm always going to be a teacher, and I'm taking that knowledge to what I do now.
Amazing. Lifelong teacher, and I'm sure a lifelong learner as well. So.
100%.
Yeah. I guess looking at that, I'm curious, obviously we're going to get into XR and other technologies that you're working with today, but you mentioned like the smart board when you were at Kingston, when you were in South America teaching, you mentioned that was like kind of your first step into ed tech. Like, what were some of the ed tech solutions that you were working on or working with then?
So way back in the day, so let's go back, 15 years. I was one of the first ones to start using Google in the classroom and Google with faculty. So I was a vice principal of a British school back in Chile. And I had a team of about 5 teachers, and I said, let's start using Google Calendars, and let's start using, this is before Google Classroom was even a thing.
Okay.
We started using some of that. We started recording YouTube videos way back when, and I was teaching English literature at the time, so we would do English literature breakdowns of poems and plays. We'd record on video with graphics, and I think 15 years ago, and give them to our students. So really, since then, it's been everything that I do is thinking about different ways that students can get that content. I'm sure you're familiar with Universal Design for Learning that everyone talks about now, and every institution is trying to implement it. Well, I mean, that's been around for a long time. It hasn't had the label of Universal Design for Learning, but I've always been thinking about, for those learners who don't necessarily want to write an essay or aren't really good at writing, how else can they express what they've learned and show what they've learned? Mm-hmm. So really, I mean, any sort of tech that you can imagine, I've tried it. At George Brown, I was the first to use iPads for in class. So we went out and I got a pilot. We bought 40 iPads in a cart, and I wheeled them into, I think it was, what was it? Physical education or something like that. And I had the students actually doing everything paperless. So I was one of the first ones. I think I was the first one at George Brown to try to bring in paperless delivery. And that was 10 years ago, at least.
Very cool. Very cool. And it seems like this kind of a recurring theme with all of the guests that have been on the show, but I'll ask you as well, was that all just passion driven and finding that technology yourself and bringing it to the classroom? Yeah. There was no
100%. Yeah. There was nobody saying you should do this. It was me. It was actually the reverse, which I'm sure you've heard from many of your guests, which was me kind of thinking about different solutions, kind of shopping it around to whoever would pay for it, and then piloting it. So yeah, it was driven by really my kind of passion for figuring out different ways to do things.
Amazing. And in finding that and finding those solutions, like you mentioned, some students might not learn through or might not be great at writing an essay or something along that line. So introducing these technologies allows them to do something else to prove that they've learned what they're supposed to. Is that kind of the main motivation around bringing these technologies in, or are there other aspects of them?
I think that the industrial model of education has been around for a long time, and I'm sure lots of your listeners have, watched that 12-minute clip from Sir Ken Robinson, who talks about the educational model and how we, it's designed on an industrial scale. The bell rings at 3:00. We get summers off so that we can go work in the fields. Everyone's put in the same place at the same age, regardless of what their abilities are. That model has been around for 200 years. And in most institutions, they're still embracing that same model. So I always thought, for me as a learner, I didn't learn the same way as a lot of other people did. I didn't like writing essays. I could do it, but it wasn't my best way of expressing myself. I'm better socially. I'm better talking. I'm better using audio and video and visual cues. So I was always thinking about how are there other ways that students can show that they understand without having to be sort of defined by the rigid, write a 5-paragraph essay with a thesis statement to describe what it is that you know.
Yes. Yeah. Love that way of, looking at education, because it is true. Everyone learns differently and at different paces. So yeah, amazing. And I guess jumping into the XR VR side of things then, let's take a step back. Where did you first try XR VR? And then what led you to think it's a great tool to bring into the education space?
4 years ago, I went to TESS, which is the eCampus Ontario conference. And I always go to a lot of these conferences. I was presenting at a lot of conferences. I've presented in San Francisco, New Orleans, mostly with the League of Innovation. And I always saw sort of what people were doing. But 4 years ago, I went to this conference, and this is why people should go to conferences, because they meet great people and they learn a whole lot, is I met Rob Terrio from Georgian, who I'm sure you've spoken to, and if you haven't, I'm sure you will.
Just recorded with him yesterday.
You just recorded with him yesterday. There you go.
Yeah.
So he really is, the guru when it comes to higher ed and immersive tech in Ontario. Everybody knows who he is. He's now running a micro-credential through Georgian on teaching in VR. So him and I got to speaking. I just started at the Center for Teaching and Learning in George Brown. So I went out and I bought a visor, the visor you put your phone in, and I started playing around with 360. And that's how it started. And luckily at George Brown, there are a few people who really believe in this. And everything that I asked, can I buy this? Can I buy this? Can I experiment with this? They said yes, and they funded it. So really, I had the ability to incubate and practice and fail a lot. I failed a lot at George Brown, and that sort of allowed me to really start to kick in and practice. And eventually, we've been able to buy a whole bunch of headsets. They're now doing actual classes in VR during the pandemic. We tried a whole bunch of different ways to get the VR headsets to students. It was very messy, but in all that messiness just means learning. It just means figuring out what works, what doesn't work, and doing that. So it's been a really, really fun journey for sure.
Amazing. And what have been some of those like big learning pieces or tips that you could pass on to people jumping in for the first time?
Oh, there's so many. Number one, and I'm sure everyone has said this, is failure is actually good. I think the best way to start is to buy something, and try it and figure out and put people into it and find out why it works and doesn't work. Someone once said, I can't remember who actually said it, but the good thing about breaking stuff is that you get to, once it's broken, you get to open it up and see what's inside, right?
It's good.
I wish I could attribute that quote to somebody, but whoever said it was very wise. We think about we're buying something and we have to protect it, and it sits in an office somewhere and it's treated like this. Your first VR headset, for example, it's treated like this special object that you have to be extremely careful with. Well, I always thought, no, let's get it out. Let's get it dirty. If we break it, we buy another one. Right. So yeah, it's always been that experimentation part and that risk part. This also involves time. So, a lot of faculty don't have the luxury of spending hours figuring out how to use Steam and how to, project your VR headset onto a screen if you only have one. But I had the luxury of being in a position where I could spend a lot of time figuring out what worked and what didn't work. So yeah, number one would be taking a risk, just doing it, jumping in. I'm definitely a jump in with both feet kind of person. And that can be detrimental because sometimes I get over my skis, to use that. I'm not a skier, but I'm a mortar, but to get over my skis, get a little bit far ahead of myself, which I do quite a bit, admittedly. But really you have to do it to actually try it.
Great advice. Definitely. I know ourselves, we failed so much starting up, and same as you,
Sure.
Broke a couple controllers and a few things, just getting the VR headset out there. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure. And once you've taken the risk, and I think this is the single biggest challenge right now in what we're doing, is you have to sell it. So selling it becomes very difficult because you can buy one headset and you can fool around, or you can buy 10 and get some students into it. But to get an institutional buy-in, to get buy-in from people who are higher up, who aren't necessarily in the classroom every day, that is a huge, huge challenge for VR and for XR. As you know, I can tell you what it is and I can show you a video of what it is, but until I can get your head into a VR headset and show you what it is, it's very hard to sell.
For sure. That was going to be my next question. So like you said, you had a lot of support from George Brown and getting those first initial pieces of equipment. Was that kind of just the next step, was getting higher ups at the school into VR, or what were the other things that you were doing to push it forward?
Yeah. So we kind of just went rogue. So we put it into a bunch of different classes, architectural technology, event planning, and we just did a whole bunch of things. And then we tried to put together sort of promotional ideas. We presented conferences, we'd show them what we did. And again, the same thing happened is people would see it on a 2D screen. They'd say, wow, this is amazing. But then everything else would take over their lives. They have to mark, they have families. And it kind of looked like a nice, flashy, interesting option. But people weren't really, and people still aren't really buying into it fully. But I think that's changing. I think slowly, academic leads and VPs and people who sort of hold the purse strings are now looking at new ways of teaching and learning and innovative workspaces. And what's the new phrase now? New ways of work, right? That will all start to integrate in. Yeah, that will all start to integrate into XR. It's going slowly for sure.
Yeah, it's shifting, but yeah, it's taking its time. And that's kind of similar advice that Rob gave when I was interviewing him. He was talking about just getting your first VR headset, setting it up, and bringing in faculty from all different programs and departments in to like get that demo, and then some of them are going to be like, yeah, let's try this out as a pilot in our class, and that gives you that initial traction to get going.
Yeah, and faculty, faculty have their ways of doing things. So if you're teaching, I don't know, welding, you've been teaching welding for 10 years, and then all of a sudden someone who's not a welder comes in and say, hey, you should try this. That can be a hard sell, right? Because they have the ways of doing things. They have their PowerPoints, if that's the way that, they're delivering their content or their teaching. That transition can be tough. I mean, now Rob, Georgian is really running with this. They're really embracing it. And I think he's got 300 plus headsets. He's working in 5 different labs or even more. He's delivering this all over Southwestern Ontario to students. He's really driving this quite a bit. And I think that says a lot about his ability to sell it. He has a position where I'm not sure what his title is, but director or manager of their innovative study, but their innovative space. They've gone full into it. And I know Conestoga and Russ Faubert has as well. And there's quite a few institutions who have, but there's also quite a few institutions that have not. That really,
I wouldn't even say it's quite a few. It's kind of this strong
maybe
handful.
There's 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And most of them are still in the stage of somebody in their school of design or computer technology is trying it with 10 people. And I think that's where we are right now.
For sure. And on that, like, what would be your recommendation for how do they spread it past that point? Like when you were going to those other like architecture or other departments, did you have applications that like applied to those that you could like give them those demos in, or were you just going in with the 1 or 2 like 360 videos or other demos that you might already have, and then you're like, VR is cool, let's find a solution for you?
They're moving slowly. I think and I've been to quite a few other institutions. Everyone's moving slowly. VR in itself and XR, and I think augmented reality is going to become more and more prevalent. I think there was sort of this kind of balancing between VR, virtual reality, the headset, big, heavy, kind of makes you a little bit sweaty, can make you dizzy, and AR. And I think AR was kind of trailing. Now I feel like it's almost become equal, where people are looking at augmented reality and virtual reality the same. I think augmented reality might even start to surpass virtual reality.
With the new hardware.
The new hardware. I mean, once Apple decides to make a move, and if they do what people are expecting they're going to do, I suspect that that's going to be a watershed moment, just as the iPad was or the iPhone was in 2006, 10? I think 6 was the iPad. iPhone?
Yeah, I think so.
And the iPad was 2010. Yeah. Once Apple gets into the game, I think that's going to change a lot of things. But VR in itself is really complicated. It's very, very complicated. In my iPad pilot, I was bringing in one tool, and it was the same piece of equipment that used the same Wi-Fi. it didn't have a keyboard, but really the technology was very similar to what they've been using. Now, when you're bringing in AR and VR, it's a complete shift in the technology, and it's a completely new phase. So really that transition is tough. It's not easy. But as we keep going and as the market starts to, I think the market in this case is going to push education. I think usually, education's always a few steps slower, especially public institutions. They're always a bit slow. But I think at this point, the market is going to start to push the education system forward. So as Meta starts to, and Meta's a bad example because they're going through a rough time right now, there's a lot of value in what they're doing. But as Meta and as Microsoft and Epic Games and all these big companies start to move, I think they'll slowly start to bring education forward. I'm not sure if I even answered your question there.
No, I think that answers it. Yeah, I can't remember exactly what the question was, but I think it mostly answered it. Interesting that you say that about industry pushing education forward, though, because I was reading an article and I think I posted it in one of my Friday recaps a couple of weeks ago. And it was kind of arguing for the opposite side of things well, not exactly, but how education has pushed so many technologies forward, and like the internet being invented in colleges, and things along those lines. And it was saying like education kind of has an opportunity right now where open standards are being set and different like SDKs and things are being developed, where if education takes a hold of that, and like obviously ourselves, we're on the Immersive Learning Research Network and all these different networks that are setting these standards. And the article was kind of arguing that education in the past has continued to drop the ball, where it invents the internet and then doesn't get any benefit from it. So I'm curious on your thoughts. Is there any way that you think education could, looking back to what you were saying, like leapfrog and then have some sort of benefit from the impact it could make?
Well, listen, I think so much innovation comes from education. So much innovation comes from these campuses across Canada, North America, and the world, where you've got, this little intrepid group of professors, teachers, educators who are trying things. And one thing that education allows, that educational institutions allow, is a place to fail, but also a place to test. Big companies, so Meta, to use that example, they can go ahead and produce these headsets, and they can have all their technicians and designers figure out how it works, but really they get tested in schools. And that's really where the development's going to be. What I mean by industry driving education at this point is, again, I think there's a bottleneck, and the bottleneck is decision makers at colleges who have a whole bunch of things to worry about. And probably at this point, XR is not one of their major concerns. They're worried about enrollment. The last 3 years, they're worried about COVID. They're worried about budget constraints. There's lots of other things that they need to worry about. So I think probably XR is not one of them. But as they start to look at strategic plans for 4 or 5 years ahead, there's no doubt that, these administrators are seeing what industry wants, and the industry saying, hey, what's going on with VR? How do I train my technicians using AR or VR to help them be more efficient? They're then, through the PAC meetings that they have at college level anyways, they're then going and saying, we want to take a look at this. That's filtering to the administration. And I'm hoping at that point, industry is going to drive the administration where they start to buy in. And that's where you're going to get education becoming more important, because they'll be able to test and train students to use it, right? And that's where I think that's really, really important, is that it's hard for the professor to drive the institution from below. I know this is sort of a reverse of the way that people think about things, that, you want to start at the grassroots, but I think they're going to converge. So I think these administrators will say, okay, we need to start doing this. They'll start to look at their own institutions and they'll say, oh, there's 5 professors over there in the Center of Culinary Arts who are using this. Let's start to look and see what they're doing. So I think there's going to be a convergence. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting way to look at it from there. And this is usually a question I leave till later in the conversation, but since we're kind of here, where do you think, and how do you think XR is going to impact education, and how do you think the landscape may change over the next, you were saying like maybe 5 years, 10 years? I know it's always the big question.
That's the big question. And I don't want to get involved in the hype cycle.
Yes. Yeah.
And is it Asana's law? Is that I'm not great with names, but it's the one that says, technology is always underestimated or underestimated in the beginning, but then overestimated in the long run.
I know the one you're talking about. Yeah. It might be.
Yeah. So, yeah. But where, we say, well, it's new tech, it's not going to do anything. And then 10 years from now, it's ubiquitous and it's everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So long term, this is a revolution in education. It's a revolution for students who, as I said, were only given one opportunity to express and one opportunity to learn. You do it through watching a PowerPoint or reading a textbook. Go to chapter 12, read the 10 pages. I'll assess what you learned, and that's it. It's going to be revolutionary. And I don't want to sound like, I'm on the cheering bandwagon. I have a lot of concerns with it, specifically with accessibility. I think that's a real concern. But, in 5 years, I could see every school, and I mean secondary, post-secondary, having a VR lab, having VR headsets available. I mean, it's $500 a VR headset. What did a Chromebook cost 5 years ago, right? Probably a similar cost. Now, every school has Chromebooks that they give out to students. In the next 10 years, 5 to 10, I think every student is going to have access to some kind of immersive tech. It might not be a headset. It might be on your mobile device. It might be in a pair of glasses that are invented by, or brought on by Apple. It could be a whole bunch of different ways. And I'm going to go through this whole conversation without using the M word, right? But there's a lot of different ways. I'm not going to use it at all. But there's lots of ways to get into that. So I can see, I'm working with some schools. I just said, look, start the way that I started. Buy one headset, put it in your library in grade, in your high school. One headset. Use, I don't know, a 360 tour of Egypt. And when you hit that in grade, I believe that's grade 6, grade 5. That might be a bit early, but let's say when you're doing a history class and you have one experience on one headset in the library, have your students go in and try it on their own and see what the results are. I think that's where it's going to start. But in the long term, immersive education is going to be central in how people learn.
Couldn't agree more. And I think that's a great way to start it out in the library, and then great vision of where it could be in 5 to 10 years. Obviously that is very exciting, but you did mention the concern of accessibility, and as well, other guests have mentioned other concerns. So thinking, let's say we are 15 years down the road, and maybe let's say that all kids have their own headsets that they're bringing, so the school doesn't have to worry about buying them, the content's available. What are some of the concerns that you would say a school might want to be thinking about maybe today, or just starting to plan for in the future?
There's a lot of concern.
What are your top three or top three?
Okay, so right now? A professor that I was working with said something to me that was very wise. And he said, I love all this immersive technology, but we can't even figure out Instagram. We can't even figure out TikTok, right? So think about that. Think about TikTok and think about Instagram. Think about the benefit, but also think about the real damage that that's doing to children and adults, right? Now multiply that by 1,000 and have them not just sitting there on a screen, but actually being in a space that provides that same stimuli, right? So, instead of me watching a TikTok video, I'm now participating in it in a social space, VR chat or work, what is it, Horizons or Workrooms?
Horizon. Yeah, Horizon World.
Horizon World.
Yeah.
Or Roblox or any of those or any of those sort of mass gaming tools. Think about now immersing people in it. So we haven't even figured out the challenge. We haven't even figured out what to do with social media, which is we're in a dangerous place right now. Are we ready to start putting people into that space? And I have some very serious concerns about that. I think there's also concern about, and I know that, they say that at 13 should be the time that you're allowed to use the VR headset regularly. I've even heard that they're looking at making it 16. This technology hasn't been around for a long time. So what does it do to kids who are all of a sudden spending 3 hours a day in virtual reality? What does it do to them cognitively? What does it do to, their understanding of spatial reality if they're spending way too much time in a space that's not real? So I think that one is a big concern. I think, as I said, social media, another big concern of mine, and this is a passion that I have, is digital equity. I've been to a lot of conferences, and when I go to these conferences, I see the same face, I see the same demographic. It's mostly white male developers. No offense to you, Evan.
I'm not a developer, but yeah, completely know what you mean.
In entrepreneurs, in business owners,
Yeah.
the demographic is certainly, skewed towards a certain group of people. How do we get women in there? How do we get minorities? How do we get, Black people like me? How do I get those people involved? And I think there's a danger that the spaces that we are creating that are new continue the same trajectory of the spaces that are old. So how do we make that shift? How do we make it equitable?
Great point. No, for sure, definitely need to make it equitable. And the social media side is very interesting because it could go either way. It's like we could go down the route that we've already been on with TikTok and Instagram, etc., or maybe it's giving people more control. So now, like, it's lessening what these platforms can do. It's we'll have to see where it goes.
I don't know. I'm going to ask you the question. Do you have confidence in the way that, and I have young kids, the way that people are glued to their phones and the way that people are influenced by, Facebook and Twitter are for old people, but TikTok, Instagram, Snap, whatever is coming, do you have faith that VR is going to break the mold and do something different?
I would say, like, for the most part, looking at TikTok, Instagram, etc., like, I don't have faith looking at those, but I guess my glimmer of optimism or hope looking at, like you mentioned, Roblox or Rec Room or Minecraft or these places where you can see kids they're coming together and they're creating something that they're passionate about, they're excited about, and they're able to spend their time in that way. And sometimes it's related to education as well. It's like, well, if we're working with these platforms where it's not just about consuming content and it has easier ways to create content and be involved in the content, that's where I have that optimism on where it could go.
If I were back in education, so let's say that I'm back in teaching, I also taught grade 5, grade 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Let's say I'm in grade 4, grade 5. We'll just take grade 5. And I could design a class. I would do it all in Minecraft. I would create an entire class. It's math, social studies, physical education, any subject, and it's all linked to Minecraft. I think Minecraft is brilliant. My son plays it all the time, and he builds and creates things all the time, and he loves it, and he's creative, and he goes on to YouTube and figures out how to do it, and then just does it himself. Like, it's creating really wonderfully creative kids, but there's always the dark side, which is when you make it social, then your child is not doing it on his own. He's now doing it with people he doesn't know, from places he doesn't know. And then you've got that danger start to move in, right?
As well as, what is that social company collecting in the background and trying, how are they benefiting?
And what are they marketing? Like, you've seen what Roblox is doing. Nike has stores everywhere. So now how are you, you're moving marketing into a different domain where children are running around creating on their own, and they're not, they're probably not able to discern, what is marketing and what is not. So yeah, there's that real conflict between freedom and open educational resources or open resources, and on the other side, marketing, data collection. Like those are concerns.
No, that's a very good point. And I think Nike is a perfect example in Roblox, because for those in the audience that haven't been in the Nike space, like it has your space where you're buying clothing and everything, but then the rest of the world is a creative space where you get your own plot of land and you can build anything you want. And it's like, as a kid, that sounds amazing. I just jump in, but like you said, there's logos and ads and everything everywhere, and you're being drawn into that brand.
And how do we control that? So, I mean, I'm sure there's parental. I'm focusing on, I guess, kids, because I have 3 of them.
Yes.
But I can see what they're doing on their phones. I can see what they're watching on VR, on their iPads. How do we control what's going on in a social space in VR? If we don't even, if we as parents don't even understand it, like most of us don't even understand. A lot of people don't even understand, snap filters. But what happens when we're adding a new technology layer that we understand even less?
Yes. Yeah. No, that one's an interesting one. I don't know if you have any thoughts. I don't know how to. Have those parental controls in VR at the moment, other than limiting the games that people can play.
Listen, everything is good in moderation.
Yes.
Everything is good in moderation. Well, I shouldn't say that. Things could be less bad with moderation, right? But lots of people now are spending lots of time in front of screens. That moderation's not there. So I am concerned about it, and I'm concerned about it in the long term, 10, 15 years. What happens when my daughter, who's 4, what's that going to be like when she's 19?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, it's a very interesting future we're heading towards. And I guess to take a step back to what you were saying earlier and look at it on another lens, I would love to talk about, well, first, the work that you've been doing with body swaps, and then in conjunction with that, like how you think that we can make VR more equitable moving forward as a society.
Well,
it's a big one.
It's a big one. Yeah. A lot of people that I've talked to have, identified that because we're going into a completely new realm, again, the M word, listeners, Evan can tell you what it is, but I've decided just to stop using it altogether.
It's metaverse, if you don't.
Thank you. That provides a whole new opportunity, right? So if we're going to build something, can we build it better than what we've built previously? I think there's lots of opportunities there. And this is kind of why this is one of the reasons that I created, or I thought about the Let's Talk About Race modules, which is body swaps. And just to tell everybody, if they haven't heard, it's body swaps is they call themselves the soft skills training or a plate simulator for soft skills. So they're allowing you to not only learn, but also practice your soft skills in safety in VR, which is a really, really amazing tool. Because one of the things that I often hear is we can learn it, but we can't practice it unless we're in a real situation. And when you're talking about things like race or gender or indigeneity or religion, whatever, there are not a lot of safe spaces where you can have those conversations and make that work. So we created Let's Talk About Race to have those conversations and sort of help to shift the behavior and the thought of different people. So with that in mind, I'm hoping that through technologies like Let's Talk About or body swaps and the modules Let's Talk About Race, or their whole diversity suite of modules, that people can start to think about things in a different way, can understand where they sit in the sort of privilege hierarchy, and then shift and think about how can I include people who are not necessarily in that same space. The vast majority of business owners in the tech space, as I've said, the vast majority of the developers are white. And that's because this is the system that they came from. So how do we start to include people who are not within that demographic? And that's hard. because a lot of people don't have contact. Like you don't have contact with female developers. I think the challenge is you need to go find them. You need to make an effort to go find those diverse voices, those diverse professionals, and don't get them from the circles that you might see regularly. Go find them. There's lots of black tech associations where you can find people like that. There's lots of different places that you can go out and look and find these. And as we get more and more, that groundswell will start to grow, and we'll have people who are sitting in a room and saying, that avatar that we've created looks a certain way. Can we create 5 more that look different? Can we think about the ways that we present content in a different way? It's a big challenge, but I think it's possible. It just takes will. That's really it.
I completely agree. I think it takes will and finding those people and getting connected with those different groups that are out there instead of just the groups that you're currently with. And then on like the development side, something that I noticed, our team noticed 10 months ago or so, Ready Player Me is a software that we use a lot for our avatars, and it really only had like one body shape for everybody, and we had to do some internal edits, but now they've made those adjustments, and it's something you need to be paying attention to.
And hair texture.
Yes.
There are very few avatar. Ready Player Me, I go on there, and Verbella, I've used that before. Most of these avatar creators, they've got a whole bunch of different hairstyles, but they don't have different hair textures. So I can never find the hair that looks like mine. Meta has really, really upped their game. They have a huge variety of characters or avatar modifications that you can make. But the vast majority of avatars, and that's a very simple, it's a simplified way of looking at things, but avatars are important, and we're still pretty far behind in creating texture. Now, does that mean we can't do it? Or does that mean we haven't focused on doing it?
Yeah, I would think the latter for most.
Yeah. I mean, we have the technology. I've seen some amazing, I think, with the Unreal Engine 5 and, some of the really incredible, realistic content that's created. I'm pretty sure you can make an afro that actually looks like kinky hair, right?
Yes.
But that's just, that's one example.
No, but it's a perfect example that is very, very obvious. If you're somebody that doesn't know what we're talking about, it's very easy to see where that is missing. And if you're creating an avatar that looks like yourself, there should be options to make it look like yourself.
That's right. And having people within your institution or your company who can challenge that. I don't expect, if everyone looks the same and they're creating the same avatars, everyone's going to say, oh, it's great, because they don't have anybody with a different voice who can say, hold on a second, have we thought about this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. I see we're starting to come up on time, so how I've been liking to end these is having kind of a rapid fire session. Not all of these are related to VR or education, so I'll just say 1 or 2 words and then you respond whatever comes to mind first. So first one, pop culture.
Pop culture.
Pop culture.
Do I need to, is this a word association, so I have to say one word with it?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. Some people have been saying sentences, so I don't mind, but yeah.
Pop culture. I'm too old for pop culture.
Too old for pop culture.
That's my response to that.
Okay, similar to Rob's, but then we went in a different direction as well. But yeah, conference or conferences.
Conference or conferences. Opportunity. I recently presented at the AWE conference in Lisbon, and it was a great opportunity to meet people and to see where the industry is. So, any opportunity, it's not about trying on the fancy tech, that's one part, but just kind of getting a feeling for where the industry is. That's really important. And I want to add one thing is that I met this young gentleman who is doing his master's in VR at Swansea, and he was born in Zimbabwe. Brilliant young guy. Anybody should snap him up in a second but he's from Zimbabwe and he has a confusing name. And you think, why is he not getting the opportunities he should be getting if he were a different person? So those are the kinds of people you can meet in conferences, and they can help to influence the decisions that you make.
For sure. Yeah, so much opportunity. And I know you sent me his LinkedIn. So we are linked to hire in January. So he's on my list to reach out to once we have those positions.
That was a subtle nudge for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
What
else?
Next one. Yeah. Unity or Unreal?
I'm an educator. I don't care.
Okay.
I don't care. I care about, is it something that people can use to learn? If it's Unity, if it's Unreal, doesn't matter to me as long as the tool does what I need it to do.
Makes a lot of sense. Perfect. NFTs or educational NFTs or just anything blockchain in your mind?
Wow. Okay. My brain can only fit so much. And my brain fits right now in trying to figure out this business, trying to understand how to promote and convince people the value of immersive tech. I've thought about NFTs, blockchain, Web3. I've looked at all of that, and I just said my brain doesn't fit. So I guess one of the things that associates with this is, I think for people like you who are in the space where your job is to understand this stuff, and I use this analogy a lot, you're building Ferraris, right? So you're building Ferrari, you're trying things and you're using the newest tech, Unreal or any developer tool. You have a very nice car. The people that I work with don't even have their driver's licenses. Right? They don't understand any of this. They don't really care about it. They just say, okay, how can what you're giving me help me do what I need to do? So my brain has not had the time to really delve into Web3, NFTs, blockchain. I know it's there. I know smart people like you are going to put it to a way that I can understand it, and then I can take it to people who don't have driver's licenses. That's how I see it.
Makes a lot of sense. And yeah, definitely something that I've been in the NFT blockchain space for a while, and now at XpertVR, we're starting to look at how can we present that to innovators like yourself in the education space. So for sure on its way.
Yeah, I honestly think what I do, I think what Rob does and a lot of people do is we're filters. I'm a filter. I'm taking what you're showing me and what I'm understanding in the sort of XR space with companies and developers. I'm filtering it through what I know, and I'm trying to have it come out in a way that the people who don't have driver's licenses, to kill this metaphor completely, they can actually start to learn how to drive. So really, I'm reaching out to all of you. You guys are reaching out to me. I'm filtering it and thinking, okay, what is it that I learned from you, Evan, that's going to mean something to, a nurse that's training at St. Michael's Hospital, or, a second year international business student? How can I fit that? Right?
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Let's run through three more quickly. First one, education.
Everything starts and ends with education. Education is easy to ignore, especially if you're a big company. But your goal as a company is to have users, right? If you don't get the professors and the teachers to understand and to start to use what it is that you're selling, how are their students going to consume what it is that you're selling? So really, I think educators and education should be the focus for industry, because they're going to be the ones who are going to filter, right? Who are going to filter everything to their students, and their students will graduate and become consumers. So education for me is absolutely vital.
Love it. Yeah, definitely important as a tool to learn and be a great part of society. But then, yeah, that's a good point of it be a huge tool for industry as well.
The problem is education doesn't have money. And that's the hard part for industry to understand. That's the hard part for industry to understand. They're not going to get immediate gains from spending a lot of time, looking at a high school in Toronto or anywhere else. But the long term.
For sure. And then last one, had a bunch of amazing guests so far on the podcast. I know you don't know them all because it's not out yet, but who would you suggest other people we should have on the podcast to have these types of conversations?
Well, that's a good question. Do you have any young people? Have you had any students? Have you had any people who've had their first experiences with VR or immersive tech?
I've not had any students. That's a very interesting one. Yeah.
So to push my man from Swansea, he's the kind of person who could give you some insight to what a 24-year-old is thinking about. I think you've probably talked to old people like me. You've probably talked to educators, developers, owners.
Exactly.
Maybe talking to some people who are starting out in the journey to find out what it is that they need and what they do and how we can tailor it to them.
Love it. Love it. I am adding that to my list of people to reach out to and get on the podcast. Thank you. Well, yeah, Michael, I know you have to get going, but thank you for being on the podcast. Is there anything that you would like to say to the audience? Anything that you would like to ask of them? Or should they just check out Tapvigo and get connected with you on LinkedIn?
Check out Tapvigo. Find me on LinkedIn. Find Body Swaps. Find Let's Talk About Race. We're getting a lot of really good interest from a lot of different schools and institutions and companies, businesses. It's a project that is near and dear to my heart, and I think it has immense value. So, listeners, find me on LinkedIn and we can talk.
Awesome. And yeah, we'll link to Let's Talk About Race and Tapvigo and your LinkedIn in the show notes so everyone can find it easily. Well, yeah, Michael, thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's been a great conversation and hope you have a great weekend.
All right. We'll see you soon, Evan. Bye-bye.
See you soon. Thanks, everyone.